things off, I'll give myself another introduction here so you understand where I come from. I'm down in Gainesville, Florida. The company I work for, AK Power Solutions, like Charles mentioned, is based in Roanoke. But I work remotely in Florida, Gainesville to be precise, and I manage the Southeast territory. So everything from Key West up to DC, and parts of Alabama, Mississippi, that whole swath of territory. I develop projects with AK Power Solutions. So this just is a few bullet points of my trajectory. I got into my first EV here on the right-hand side. This is a Honda Fit. Believe it or not, this is an EV. When I lived in California, they had to make these as a compliance vehicle. So Honda made about 11,000 of these. And it was a sweet ride, but it only gave me about 83 miles on a full battery. So for all intents and purposes, I was zipping around in a golf cart around the East Bay. And at the time, I was working in the solar industry. And because of the limitations of range, I had to learn the charging network like the back of my hand. So I made some connections with companies like ChargePoint and some others. And I came back to Florida, my home state, to help Sunrun open up a branch in Orlando. And about 2 years into that role, I got a tap on the shoulder to come join ChargePoint as a channel partner representative. So I helped ChargePoint get established in the Florida market as well. So here on the left, you see my original hatchback was it has a Chevy emblem, but that was a joke. This is actually a Volkswagen Rabbit diesel, and I ran it on 100% biodiesel. So that was my first love of alternative fuels. But then I went to North Carolina to go back to college, got my degree in appropriate technologies, sustainable technologies, and from there went to solar. And for the last 7 years or so, I've been working in EV charging infrastructure. So you see a couple pictures here. This is when I worked as a channel partner for ChargePoint, setting up DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers across the Southeast. And here's my time at Ford. I worked with Ford Pro for a couple of years, focusing on government fleets, helping them electrify and set up level 2 and DC fast charging stations for behind the fence applications. That was also the Southeast. So enough about me. I just wanted to give you that little insight to my background so you understand that I've seen quite a few things in this landscape, and I can identify a few pain points as to why it seems us EV drivers and enthusiasts are twiddling thumbs waiting for these EV chargers to come about. It's taking a lot longer than you might think it should take, but there are some good reasons. So to begin with, we had grid and utility challenges. So a lot of the sites that would be good for DC fast charging don't have 480 volt service. Typically, commercial buildings will have 208, 240. So we need to step that up to 480 volts, three-phase power. And the issue with that is the lead times on that equipment is stretching out further and further. This has a lot to do with competition from data centers and AI that also require 480 volt service, as well as supply chain issues. And COVID was a big gut punch for supply chain as well. So there's a lot of factors that are slowing down the ability for sites to procure this equipment. And that's actually what my company comes in to solve, is that big pain point. So as Charles mentioned, we're based out of Roanoke, and what we do is we manufacture and engineer transformers, and we have access to much quicker lead times. So whereas most people are waiting more than 2 years for just that transformer, we can deliver within 28 weeks, which is a godsend to a lot of site developers that don't want to keep waiting. Because these are big investment projects, and the longer you wait, the harder it is to make your investors happy. So that kind of outlines the grid and utility challenges. Utility planning is very complex as well. So utilities will need to perform a load calculation to determine how much electricity and how large the transformers need to be. And there's a lot of speculation that goes into that. So utilization, what we call is basically that's a fancy way of saying how many EV vehicles, EV drivers rather, will be utilizing that site on any given day. And so a site planner, somebody who's developing the site might be a little more optimistic versus a distribution team at the utility who has been working there for 20 plus years and has seen a lot of these types of projects go in and not be as quick to take off as perhaps the investors want to think. So there's a bit of a delta between optimism and being realistic in terms of how many EV drivers will be using those sites. So the utility really needs to take that into account and be pretty meticulous with that load calculation. So that takes time. And then we have permitting and regulatory challenges. So we have issues with inconsistent permitting across the country. This varies by locality, by utility, by AHJ. Many rural areas are still um, lagging, obviously, when it comes to DC fast charging. However, it's more attractive to investors to put DC fast chargers in high traffic areas. Um, so there's a bit of a disconnect there between who really needs the charging access and who eventually has it. So it's more so geared towards transient traffic, people traveling across the interstate corridors at this point. But there is a big need for it in the rural areas to kind of help them feel safe the next time they go to a car dealership to say, hey, let's get an EV instead of another gas guzzler. There's very lengthy review processes. Again, that load calculation takes a bit. Um, there's a lot of it's not a one size fits all. So if you're talking about a project in Greensboro, North Carolina versus Roanoke, Virginia versus Tampa, Florida, it's all going to vary based on that utility and the AHJ. So a lot of hurdles to get across to get the shovel in the ground, so to speak. And NEVI was really going to help with that, but the new administration has frozen a lot of the NEVI progress as well as the CFI grants. So much of this future rollout is beholden on the it's really in the hands of private investments. So they really have to look at this from all angles before they invest millions of dollars because these are very expensive projects. Just to kind of give you guys an idea, just the transformer alone, depending on the size needed, could be $500,000. And we're not even talking about the DC fast chargers themselves or the software that is a subscription for the site host that they have to have a recurring cost to keep the software up and running so that drivers could pull up and use an app or a credit card at the payment system. So there's a lot of cost associated with DC fast charging. Another issue is with the site development is location planning. Again, going back to utilization. If we're talking to a group of investors and they have the purse strings to let us borrow money to implement a large DC fast charging project, they're going to want to look at projections and calculations and see what time it'll take before they could make their money back. So um, a lot of things go into a lot of things have to be considered, like driver amenities. So this is something that NEVI kind of set standards for in terms of lighting, safety, restrooms, lodging, nearby restaurants, things of that nature, so that EV drivers wouldn't just pull up to a desolate area with no lighting and low safety. Um, Chargers oftentimes require canopies and signage and ADA access and other safety features. These increase costs but improve user experience. And then construction complexity, having to trench and run conduit. You have many power conversion pieces of a puzzle that are all expensive, not just the transformer, but you also need switchboard and a separate meter and emergency shutoff switches. So most of these require a pad pour. And then in between those pads, you have to trench and run conduit so that the price drives up pretty quickly. So, and apologies again, I'm kind of being redundant with these slides because I threw this together. in my free time today to get ready for this. But again, financial and business challenges, uneven utilization across different sites. Rural stations are very much needed, but they could sit idle for most of the day or days on end. So when looking at an ROI, it's not as attractive to put these in country or county roads that don't get as much traffic as, say, an interstate. Um, and I'm happy to extend these slides so I don't just drone through each line because there's a lot. But yeah, I hope I'm painting a pretty vivid picture of some of these obstacles and why it takes so long to put these in the ground. Another issue here that I point out is kind of controversial, and I'll stay neutral like Switzerland here, but there's a lot of contention with utilities entering the market and implementing their own charging networks. Here in Florida, for instance, Florida Power and Light has the the Evolution Network, which is a series of fast chargers across the interstate corridors. And they're great for me for, if I'm driving my EV more than 200 miles and I need to stop and charge somewhere. I look for the FPL units because they're only 30 cents a kilowatt hour before taxes. The average cost in Florida is about 45 cents a kilowatt hour. So you could imagine that disparity doesn't sit well with private investors and companies that don't also happen to sell the electrons. Because when you sell the power and you get in the DC fast charging business, you're kind of double dipping if you think about it. So there seems to be a level of it's an uneven playing field, and so that's why it's a contentious subject. But for the driver, from my perspective as a driver, I look forward to more of those utility backed DC fast chargers because they're typically more affordable, but they're also discouraging private investment, which we need right now because of the frozen incentives and grants from this new administration. So it's a little complex, as you could tell. Before I go on, any questions that come to mind before I continue? All right. Silence is golden. Um, so then we have technical and operational challenges. So once these are in the ground, it's not all confetti and everybody goes home and relaxes. The site host now has to be concerned with the uptime of those units. Um, I've been driving EVs for about 9 years at this point, and I remember the early days of um, DC fast charging was a bit tumultuous and anxiety inducing because you weren't exactly sure if that EV charger was going to work. And oftentimes people pull into those with maybe 20% or less battery remaining. So they really have to plug in and charge, and they can't afford to drive to another location. This has improved drastically over the years, over the last 3 years or so, I would say. A lot of that has to do with the NEVI minimums that were rolled out to uphold at least a 97% uptime and to uphold operation and maintenance standards of a minimum 5 years for those NEVI awarded sites. So that really kind of raised the bar across the industry for the O&M side. So interoperability is also a kind of complex issue. Any Nissan Leaf drivers or Asian makes may still be using CHAdeMO as their port. That's being phased out. And so right now we have the combined charging standard, the CCS, and the J3400, also known as the North American Charging Standard, coming into dominance, and the NACS, as they call it, will be the standard coming up in the next few years. So there's a lot of consolidation, a lot of adapters hitting the market. I know Ford, when I was at Ford, was one of the first, I think the first big OEM to make the splash in the water and make that announcement that they were going to make the Tesla plug, the NACS, their standard in future vehicles. So adapters are very interesting. That's a market that's beginning to evolve, and there's a lot of third market adapters out there that enable vehicles that have CCS to use NACS. So that's somewhere to kind of keep your eyes on as things continue to mature and develop. And then you have standards and payments. So one of the biggest pain points for EV drivers I speak to is having to download a myriad of different apps to be able to navigate and use different DC fast chargers in the wild. And so this is kind of an annoying aspect of these early days of EVs is if you're taking a road trip, you may have to just hope that you're within network. You already have the ChargePoint app. You might already have the Electrify America app, but there may be a different network that has their own proprietary app that you have to download. And sometimes your cell reception might not be up to snuff to download in a timely manner. So that's another issue that's being ironed out. There's a lot of uh, point of sales mechanisms like NAICS and others that you could actually use a credit card to pay instead of having to download an app. But those aren't always as reliable. And if they have any issues, it's not something that the DC fast charging company can resolve right away because that is a vendor that they have to contact to go out and fix it, whether remotely or in person. So there's a lot of pieces in these puzzles that make this not as easy as one might think. Oh, I skipped ahead too many. So moving away from the public charging landscape, looking at multifamily, this is a huge need, in my opinion. I think the largest vacuum and oftentimes not spoken about very much in public spaces or the media. Multifamily charging is one of the biggest obstacles to wider EV adoption. Again, I've been driving for about 9 years EVs, and I would say 98% of my charging takes place at my home. And I'm blessed to have a um, there's something kind of creeping up from California, and they're setting a standard for other states to implement EV readiness. So there's a difference between being EV capable and being EV ready when it comes to building new multifamily units. EV ready is really where we need to be, and that is essentially making it so that every parking space has access to, at minimum, a 110-volt outlet so that they could trickle charge at bare minimum. Preferably, it would be a level 2, so they get about 25 miles added per hour they're plugged in, but that drives up costs. But there's an interesting study from the the ICCT that shows it's really only about a 0.3% increase in costs to make a 60 unit building 100% EV ready. So in the grand scheme of things, it's really not too big a lift, not too heavy a lift. So my advice to the five of us on this call is be the squeaky wheel at your within your local politics. Call up your state representatives and talk about this issue because it's oftentimes not spoken about. Multifamily access is very important to the wider EV adoption that we're hopefully going to get to sooner than later. Uh, and here at the bottom, I didn't have too much time to dig into this, but it seems like it was stricken from the docket. But Virginia had a House bill introduced that would require 25% of parking in new 25 plus unit multifamily projects for EV readiness, which would have been great. So I'm not sure where that stands, if it's been completely dismissed or if it's still, if it still has a pulse. I hope for the latter because that would be great for a southern state to be one of the leaders in introducing this type of legislation.
I can jump in there actually.
Please
So
do.
yeah, I definitely remember that bill. And yeah, I think it was like laid so like basically it doesn't it's done. And the argument was, well, there were at least the Republicans on the committee that I was considering said, well, if you're going to have requirements for EV readiness, that should be done through the code process.
Hmm.
With the irony is that when there's a number of folks with the Sierra Club, and then I work with them too, that have tried to do exactly that when Virginia has there's like a board of people and they're primarily people in the construction industry that when the I think it's a I forget what the cycle is, but in a certain cycle they revisit the code and make adjustments to it. And every time, and at least the last couple of times that that they try to suggest EV rate they say, well, that's not really appropriate to do to code. We should really be done through legislation. So they keep tossing it back and forth because basically they don't want any the builders don't want it to have to pay any extra or do anything more than they have to do, and then lawmakers don't want to make them do it. So that's pretty much where we're at right now.
It's very frustrating. And from what I know, I don't know all the details, but I heard that the last version of the National Electric Code had some kind of language in it that was kind of halfway between EV capable and EV ready. That at the 11th hour, some lobbyist convinced whoever to strike it from the new published version. So we got to keep fighting. We got to keep fighting for that because I think that's a huge need to bring up and make this equitable for anybody who's interested in driving EV. Um, but I'll get off that soapbox. My last slide here is about workplace charging. So this is becoming pretty popular. Anytime I go out to California, I see a lot of workplace chargers. Not so much here in the Southeast, but they're beginning to pop up. And really, it's about employee loyalty and retention because if you have an option to work somewhere and the salary is comparable and the health benefits are comparable, but one company has EV chargers and the other doesn't, it could really sway talent towards that employer that has EV chargers. Because think about it, if you're charging up at home, that's incurring a cost and you're paying for that with your utility bill. Um, or if you have the benefit of or the luxury of having solar, you could offset those costs. I have a small 4.74 kW solar system on my south-facing roof. So that offsets a lot of my EV charging, but not everybody has a south-facing roof that's baking in the sun, and not everybody has a garage or a carport where they could charge up. So workplace charging is another area that we could really help folks out to encourage them to get into EVs. So that's basically all my slides. I was trying to put together a conclusion slide, but ran out of time because I had a full day of work plus trying to do this. But hopefully I painted a fairly vivid picture of some of those challenges, and I'm happy to take some questions.
No, you did a great job considering that you put this together so quickly, and I really appreciate you doing that. So you did great. It was great. I think the conclusion is like, yeah, it's tough.
Trying to
Any
stick the landing, but yeah, thank you, Charles. I appreciate that.
any questions anybody have? Let me check the chat. See if there's any questions there. Okay, no questions there. I mean, I'll throw one out there while people think about it. So I was thinking, so like it seems like, and this is again just anecdotal, my observation, because there's like a neighborhood where there was like Tesla chargers that were being installed, and then there was like down the block there was an install happening at a Target. I should say the Teslas were being installed at a Wawa, and then the Electrify America chargers were being installed at a Target. And the Electrify America one took so long. It's like it was more than a year from the time they actually said, okay, we're going to put the chargers here to the time it actually opened. And in the meantime, the Tesla one had already been open like
Yeah.
for 6 months. So it seems like my perception that they're able to get charges in the ground faster. And is that your case from your experience? And if so, what's the magic sauce on their end?
That's been my experience. I've seen Tesla sites go up in, just a snap of a finger, and I scratch my head and wonder why. I actually went by one a few weeks ago, and I was able to see it in different stages because it was in Gainesville. So I went when it was just, a bunch of bulldozers or excavators getting the dirt and pulling up the asphalt to clear the space. And it took about, I would say, about 2 months to get everything up and running. In the secret sauce, to answer your question, and may be more to it, but the secret sauce is that they had a used transformer put in place. Typically, that's the big linchpin, is getting the transformer to the site. So I think they had some kind of inventory somewhere, and they just picked one of the transformers they had and sent it to that site. So I'm not sure if they purchased used transformers ahead of time and just stocked them uh, based on their planning and forecast. That would be smart, and that's my guess. But again, that's my speculation as well. I do know the EPC who managed that product, so I could ask them if they could share any more tidbits as to why they go so fast. But that's my suspicion is they use secondhand transformers.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've heard that from other folks that the Transformers part. I mean, and I guess it's dated back from the pandemic, right? That kind of screwed up supply chains, but then it seems like that's still been continuing. And I mean, do you see that still continuing to be a case where there's not enough Transformers that are really expensive?
Absolutely. And we have the blessing of being here in the South with this beautiful weather, but part of the curse is that we are susceptible to hurricanes. So a lot of these states that are on the Coast um, have to keep a certain amount of transformers stocked for emergency response. So it's a little longer. I spoke to somebody who was working with the city of Raleigh, and they had been waiting 5 years for a transformer upgrade, which is the longest wait time I've heard of. But typically, the average, site developer is waiting about 2 years for that transformer. Another issue that is competing with EV charging transformer procurement is the data center boom. So there's a
Hmm.
lot of data centers, and with the boom of AI and everybody using AI so much, that requires more data centers and more transformers, and those are competing directly with what would otherwise go to DC fast chargers. So we got hit with COVID, supply chain issues, and now competing with data centers is a problem. But like I said, just shameless self-promotion. Our company, AK Power Solutions, we have cozy relationships with suppliers globally. We share ownership with Virginia Transformer Corporation, which happens to be the largest US-based manufacturer of transformers in all of North America. So we can deliver transformers within 28 weeks through our integrated power module, which puts the transformer, the switchboard, and the meter in one NEMA 3R rated enclosure. So it's a lot simpler, less trenching, less conduit runs, quicker deployments. So that's our shiniest value proposition is how quickly we could get those out to EPCs and developers.
Well, I mean, you answered my other question is that what's your guys' secret sauce? And that's it definitely sounds like that's the case, that you're able to address at least the transformer aspect of it. The permitting and all the other stuff, I guess, is
Yeah.
everybody's problem right now.
Yeah,
And to
that's
do that.
we don't mess with the permitting and all the hoops that the EPC typically has to jump through.
Right. Right.
Um, but in terms of manufacturing, engineering, what's needed for that step down from the medium voltage to low voltage, which the DC fast chargers take, we certainly can handle that and help out developers.
Great. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure,
Um, so what if we go off the grid, like have your own power source, like
sure.
solar or something like that, some kind of other power source for the off the grid?
Good question. So I'm actually helping a EPC here in Florida set up a DC fast charging hub, and they're pretty ambitious. They want it to primarily be powered by solar and battery storage. And they had two sites picked out, And they are now kind of stuck because the local utility considers the amount of solar that they plan to install to constitute them as their own utility. So they're having to work with civil consultants to get past those hurdles, so that they could work within that utility and not threaten their business model. Remember that utilities make money by building more assets and by selling electrons to the end users, you and me. Uh, so there is certainly some symbiotic relationship between microgrids and utility scale solar and commercial solar, but there's also a little threat looming. So they just kind of have to revamp their policy and look at this case by case. Uh, the utilities have been doing the same thing, rinse repeat for decades and decades now. Now things are kind of in fast forward hyper speed, evolving towards virtual power plants and distributed energy and EV chargers and microgrids. So they really have to think fast and act quicker to stay relevant and be able to accommodate all of this new infrastructure that's going to be put in place in the next 5, 10 years. I'm all about powering EV chargers with renewable energy. That's what I went to school for. That's what I hope to help uh, make possible and bring forth as a reality is clean EV drivers. It's a good feeling to drive on sunshine.